So, welcome to the second of Nature Recovery Network's Tiny Talks. I'm Katrina Bass, for those who don't know. I farm Longmead Wildlife Site, which is part of the Nature Recovery Network. And I think just for those who are coming from a bit further afield, just to say that we set up the Nature Recovery Network a year ago as a place-based network for nature recovery that aimed to bring people who wanted to do something together with people who knew how to do it. And most importantly, living in the same place. And we kind of hoped that this would address issues of, first of all, sustainability, which is always a big problem in any nature recovery projects, and also scalability. So for me, a year on, this wonderful number of people who've come together to agree to share what they know in our tiny talks is absolutely fantastic. So tonight we have Clare Hill, who's going to tell us about regenerative farming techniques at Wytham, where she farms 1,000 acres, including the wonderful Yarnton Mead and Pixie Mead, the sites of special scientific interest that are these fantastic wildflower meadows, which you can see behind me, actually. That's not Yarnton Mead, that's actually Longmead, but Yarnton and Pixie are even more wonderful. And she also farms land that belongs to the university. So I met Clare's sheep before I met Clare. But now we've come together in the Thames Valley Wildflower Meadow Restoration Project. And hopefully her sheep might soon be grazing our meadows. And we are planning to help her restore one of her meadows by planting out established wildflower plants that we've been growing on Longmead. So this is the kind of nature recovery network operating at another level. But importantly, I think what the nature recovery going on in the villages can connect up into this, and there you get the kind of scalability. But also, I think what she's going to tell us about regenerative farming techniques and their importance for carbon capture and so on is not only important for those of us who farm, but actually is scalable to what we do on the allotment or in our veg patches. So that's the kind of scale. But right at the other end of the scale, Clare uses her knowledge on the farm to connect with food brands such as Arla and McDonald's to advance better food systems at a much bigger scale. So I'm going to leave Clare to talk about and describe the regenerative techniques, and over to you.
Thanks, Katrina, and evening, everyone. I'm actually going to share a video first off, just so that it gives a bit of an introduction, much quicker and more eloquently than I can, to what we're doing, and then we'll run through some other bits after the video. So here we go. I'm Clare Hill, Regenerative Agriculture Director at FAI Farms. We're here today talking about our journey on regenerative agriculture so far. So we farm 1,500 acres in Oxfordshire, mostly owned by Oxford University. We're tenants, we've been here for 20 years. Today we farm beef, sheep and laying hens. So we're just coming to the end of our first year of our transition over to farming regeneratively. I have to say it's been pretty exciting, intense at times, challenging, most of all challenging of our minds, and we've almost had to kind of unlearn and then relearn everything we knew about farming. About 5 years ago, we decided we wanted to work towards removing grain from our ruminant diets to try and farm in a more sustainable way. And we achieved that about 2 years ago. And since then, we then started asking ourselves more questions about our food production. We started hearing about regenerative agriculture, and we watched films like The Carbon Cowboys over in the States and started to think maybe there's something in this, particularly when we hear about climate change creating flood and drought issues for farmers even in the UK. Farm profitability always seems to be a challenge, farmer mental health is an issue, and we started to piece all these things together and think about maybe there is a different way. I think there were two main points that I came to in the years leading up to this that made me make the decision that we needed to do something different. With the sheep, we'd had ongoing worm burden problems, and it really hit home when we realised we had resistance to orange drenches. We've been doing all the best advised practice, but we just didn't seem to be able to get on top of the worm problem. The second point was that we did some work on understanding our grazing capacity of the farm, and the consultant working with us gave us figures of being able to run 200 cows with all their calves plus 1,000 ewes. But I looked at the farm and I thought, I don't know how we're going to do this, especially in the winter. Where are we going to put them all? And it would have required investment in a lot more shed space. So then I had to look at how much that was going to cost. And I just realised again, like, there has to be another way. So we went looking for a different solution, and that's how we ended up with regenerative agriculture.
My background is in dairy systems, and it was after spending a couple of years working and running farms in New Zealand where I saw firsthand regenerative systems that I had a shift in mindset and saw firsthand the benefits that regenerative agriculture can bring to the land, the economics of a farm business, and the welfare of the animals and the farmer involved. So we used to strive for maximum production, but now we're very much striving for optimum production and get as much production we can from the land without relying on external inputs like bought-in feed and forage, which obviously come as a cost, and relying on what we can just grow here on the farm. By taking a regenerative approach, you actually look at things differently. Although it sounds cheesy, by looking at things differently, the things you look at change. An example of that would be our grazing management. So traditionally, we would have aimed for a really neat, tight residual before we moved the cows away. But now through our mob grazing, we're actually leaving a lot more material behind. It looks a lot messier. And with my previous mindset, that was waste. I saw that as waste and bad management. But now I understand what that represents. And that's shielding the ground, keeping it warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer, so it's retaining more moisture. And that waste material, that biomass has been trampled down, is just going to feed the soil biology. Whatever you're producing, whatever you're farming, it all starts with the soil, and we really need to look after that. Through using mobile electric fencing and portable water troughs, we're able to closely manage the land using the animals as a tool and being able to make sure that certain areas of the farm that need extra rest periods get it, and that areas that need more impact from the animals through dunging and through trampling, we're able to achieve those goals. So I think it's really important, and we've really learned that it's not a quick process. It doesn't happen overnight, and we've been farming regeneratively here now for just over a year, and yet we're still learning just as much as we were when we began. And it's important to remember that this is a really enjoyable way to farm. You know, we're out in middle of December now, just rolled some bales out. Cows are really, really content, very happy. No expensive sheds or tractors or machinery needed for this system.
After we made the decision to make the transition to regenerative agriculture, we knew we couldn't do it on our own and that we would need some help. So we started working with Caroline from Roots of Nature and James Daniel from Precision Grazing. They've been absolutely key in guiding us, helping us through the tough decisions, keeping us on track, challenging us, but we couldn't have done it without their help. And so now we want to help other farmers make transitions on their farm. We tracked our transition through this first year, and we've captured all that information and we're converting it into a training course which will be launched in 2021 to help other farmers make transitions on their farm. We're coming to the end of year one, and it has been such an insightful year. We've learned so much. We're really excited about going into year two for our transition. We want to take everyone with us on that journey, and so we'll be doing regular videos on our website for everyone to see what we're doing.
Okay, so I guess I ought to, let me put a different picture up so we're not looking at that. Ought to just give a little bit of a, what is regenerative agriculture? Because we say it a lot in the video, but we don't, maybe we'll put some nice chickens up. I don't actually explain what it is. And it's an interesting one because people ask all the time for a definition. What is it? And actually, what we know is that nature isn't very definitive. It's constantly evolving and changing. And because regenerative agriculture is a system that aims to mimic natural processes, then there isn't one definition of what it is that you do. But what I would say is that we are looking at the ecosystem processes that are happening in our landscape and then trying to manage them in a way that bring productivity to our farm, but productivity in a different way. Sometimes we talk about, we're kind of redefining productivity, because often in current agricultural systems, our productivity relies on quite a lot of inputs: fertilizer, feed, medicinal products, lots of time, energy, tractors, bedding, straw, hay. And it's all kind of very, it's very energy intensive, whether that's our physical energy, whether that's our the fuel or anything else that we're using. It's quite kind of carbon reliant, I guess. And nowhere in an agricultural system in the world do we produce more biomass from a square meter than nature does itself in somewhere like the Amazon. And now we're starting to think in that way. We're starting to, as Humphrey said in the video, think about how can we maximize what we can get in our area, but by mimicking natural systems. And of course, by mimicking natural systems, we are then we are not using extra inputs, but we're also we're adding diversity to the system, because that's what nature needs, and we're bringing the good stuff in, which brings all the other things that are needed back in our land, like carbon capture, biodiversity, and so helping to be a system that can actually start to bring benefits: more biodiversity, carbon drawdown. Agriculture is the only industry, I think, that that I know of that actually has the ability to draw down carbon without much technology. Any technology, in fact, just requires a change in management system and a change in mindset more than anything. You'll see here our chickens. These are our laying hens. Anyone that walks around the farm might start to see a couple more of these when we can finally let the hens roam again and we're not restricted by bird flu. But these are properly mobile sheds, so they are moving every day. So the hens are on fresh grass every day, but they're not necessarily grazers. It's not so much about the grass. It's about the insects, the soil, the grit, the stones, again, the diversity that they're able to get in their diet. And so our aim is for them to be following the cattle and sheep around the farm. Because the other thing that they do, I mentioned in the video, sheep worms being a problem, a common problem on sheep farms across the world. And with increasing temperatures, and because nature eventually will evolve to overtake any technology that we can come up with, the worms themselves have evolved to stay in the pasture for longer, to become resistant to the products. There's as we all familiar with, antibiotic resistance is growing. Well, anthelmintic resistance is growing too, and anthelmintics are the products we use to treat worms in animals. And you hear me mention there that we've become resistant to another product. And being an organic farmer, without that product in our worms are now resistant to that. So without that product in our armor, we're really restricted. And so we needed to look for another way. So now, by having much bigger rotations, as in the animals only graze each area of the farm once per year, that break enables the worm cycles to break. But also, with the chickens following behind, what do chickens love to eat the most? Well, that's worms and worm eggs and fly eggs. So they scratch through the beef and sheep manure and they eat all the good stuff, and then that's adding into their diet. And of course, conventionally, farms now, we're feeding chickens on the biggest proportion of protein in their diet is from soya. We're all familiar with the problems of soya coming from South America. Before we even think about deforestation and everything else, like the fact we're shipping soya, so that we can have local eggs is crazy. So, as Humphrey said, once you start to think about these things a bit differently, you start to unpick a lot. So it's basically a way of mimicking nature. And one thing is about root cause. So often we would think about, with my old mindset, it would be use the sheep worm as an example. We've got sheep worms, we'll treat them, or we'll move them into a different field. And that would be the end of it. But now we ask ourselves, why have they got the worms? And we really drill down to the root cause of what's happening on the farm. And one of the reasons that we realized we had the worms was because we've had sheep on the farm a long time. As part of our transition to feeding less grain, we were grazing the sheep a lot more. And that meant that we had sheep kind of on the farm in every field all the time. And also that when we graze, we have this kind of utilization is a measure that farmers use. So we've got to maximize the utilization. We've got to eat all the grass up. And when doing that, we take the grass down quite short. And where do the worm eggs live? They just live in the shortness of the grass. So as soon as you have long grass, the sheep can't even eat the worm eggs and ingest them and continue and act as a host of that cycle. So within 1 year, we've completely broken our worm egg cycle on the sheep. We have used wormers a couple of times because we've had some high levels, but instead of just accepting that, we're now like, right, how do we move that so we don't need to use them at all again? And I could talk all evening about lots of examples of of different things that we do differently. But the one thing, question, of course, sometimes it seems so simple, like what people say, well, especially when you talk to people that aren't involved in farming or food production, they're like, well, I don't get it, like that seems crazy. Why would you do what you've been doing when you can do what you're doing now? We're more financially resilient, flood resilient, drought resilient, the animals are healthier, it costs less for us to produce, the soil is getting healthier and drawing down more carbon. Like that, somebody asked us, we had a webinar the other evening, what's the bad bits, like what don't you like? And I was like, I couldn't think of anything, but I'll ask my team. And so the next morning, team meeting, what do you think? Yeah, no, I can't really think of anything. So when I talk about in the video about it being a tough year, it's been tough because we've had to learn how to do things differently, and it's like starting a new job. It's always hard work for the first year, but now we're doing it. It just feels like exciting. And 2 years ago, I didn't feel excited about farming. Every year was a battle. Everything was difficult. Everything was hard. And we hear farmers, you know, you often talking about real problems with mental health across the board now, but in agriculture is tough and financial situation isn't good. And so it's great to have something that when you talk to other farmers doing this, they're like, yeah, I finally feel excited for the first time in years. So why are more farmers not doing it? And I did a different webinar last week. It was a busy week, and used this word cloud. So this word cloud tool has the ability that while I'm talking, I ask the question, biggest barrier to uptake of regenerative farming, and then people can log on, and the people watching the conference are able to type in their results. And as you know, these things work. The bigger the word is the word that got typed in the most. And you'll see the three in the middle: fear of change, and knowledge. That there's this inbuilt kind of peer pressure to not break out of the norm, to not do anything differently. And when you have people looking over your network is your local neighbours, and when people are looking over your fence and questioning what you're doing, you feel like you don't want to do that. And I'll say that when the first year that we started doing this, I had as Katrina mentioned, Oxford University are our landlord, and we had a letter formal from the university to say that we were in breach of our tenancy because we weren't farming the land in good agricultural order, because it was no longer neat. And could we go out with our tractor and top the fields, because we had thistles, and thistles, you know, don't look good, and we see them as a weed, and it's a problem. And this would be another quick example of, in the old days, that would be, right, how can I get rid of that? How can I control that? And now we look at it and say, what is that telling us? So what I know now that thistles are telling me is that that area of land is in a low successional state, that Mother Nature has that successional state from bare rock to full forest. That's what Mother Nature's always trying to get up the stakes on the successional state. So when I have moss, I know that that's the first thing that Mother Nature brings into bare rock to help break it up. So when I've got moss in a field, she thinks that my soil is as in a badder condition as rock. So I've definitely got a problem there. But where I've got thistles, it's where I'll have bare ground, whether it's gateways or areas of high grazing, or if there's been a feeder and a lot of activity. And thistles are brilliant actually, because they're really deep rooting, they spread quickly, and they're able to break up the land and break up compaction. And actually, if I let them just do that, then and years to come, the other species will come in. Once that ground is broken up, the other species will be allowed to flourish. Whereas if I just keep cutting them every year, I'll still have the bare soil, and so they'll just keep coming every year. And it was in fact our having our meadow, Pixie Mead is just over the river. So it's a long way by road, but over the water only a matter of meters. And in Pixie there are no thistles, and in our field on our side of the river it is full of thistles. And that was one of the observations that was like, how is that happening? Like, why don't they, that all that thistle down blows over but it doesn't set seed? And there are actually some, you know, bare areas, not bare as soil, but the sward isn't very thick. But in the main, there are two reasons why it doesn't set seed. And one is that the sward is so thick. And the other is that because of the diversity, the number of species there, the biology in the soil is incredibly active and it's not compacted. And so the bare seed doesn't, the seed goes over there, but it doesn't need to do what its job on this planet is to do. So it just doesn't, it doesn't germinate and it doesn't get going. So that was a real kind of key learning for us. So I'm going to stop there because I know we might, well, hopefully we've got a couple of questions and I don't want to talk over everybody all evening. And I'll stop sharing and then I think we can all see each other a little bit better. Is that right, Katrina? Have I done the right thing? We can't hear you. I think, oh yeah, that's
yes. It. I said fantastic, so I'll say it again. Okay. that was wonderful. And there are lots of questions. I want to ask one, but I'm going to leave it to other people. I want to know how McDonald's have reacted, but you don't need to answer that yet, because there are lots of other interesting questions. So Renee Watson, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. That was just brilliant. I'm so inspired by that. I actually asked a few, so I won't ask the first one because Nikki asked basically the same question. So I'll go down to this one, which follows on from what you've just been talking about, which is how did you manage to convince the university that your approach was the right way in the end?
Yeah, so I guess I should have done it beforehand and actually just spoke to them and explained what we were doing. And I think to start with, they're a bit like, okay, yep. Whatever, thought we were a bit crazy hippies, but now they've seen the land start to recover. And of course, COVID has changed everything. And one thing is exposed is the fragility of our food systems and everybody's awareness. So in a way, you know, COVID has been a good thing for our food systems. And as just with everybody goes on a journey with regenerative agriculture. So it started from the kind of eye rolling when I first started talking about it to, okay, yep. And now they totally get it, and we're working on shared projects together. So just talking about it and using some examples. It was tough to start with because they thought we were a bit crazy, but now they're totally on board.
Great. Nikki.
Yes, totally inspiring. Thank you. I have hope. I'm really interested. I love the game from maximizing to optimizing, because I think that's a really common thing on the whole sustainability stuff. But often the economics don't kind of mirror that, and I'm really interested to know, do they, or how long will it take, or you know what else needs to happen in a policy environment? So how does the economic picture look?
Yeah, so actually the economic picture looks good. So even on our organic system, so we weren't using a lot of traditional inputs like fertilizer before. Just even the time for topping, the sheep treatments, and not just the product themselves, the time to do it all, the shepherding time, the stress, the testing, the vets, everything have slashed. And that would be there are not many sort of fully regenerative farmers across the world, but there are some, and they are growing. And that would be a voice that is reflective of that, in that actually your input costs come down so much and your productivity in a lot of cases goes up. So we are growing, our cattle are growing quicker and finishing quicker than they ever have when we were feeding grain. And again, sorry, what my point was, I got distracted by another question coming up. Our point on that is that you know, days to finish, days to slaughter, the number of days a ruminant animal is on the earth is a key for those that chase carbon. And carbon is of course very important, but it is one thing, and if we just chase carbon, we'll end up in a bigger mess in a way. But a key indicator, because ruminants do emit methane, and you know, we have to accept that, but they have a key role on our planet in drawing carbon down as well. And so that often people would look at this and say, in its extensive system, your animals are going to take a long time to finish, and therefore you're not as carbon beneficial as where we have these animals indoors, we feed them lots of grain and we finish them much more quickly. Well, we're finishing at the end of year one, we've only been doing this for 1 year. That's why I don't have financials to really share, but everything looks good so far. And our finishing times have come back. And all we're looking at is, wow, well, look, if we change things even more, you know, how much better can this get? So we also are at the moment, of course, just from a policy point of view, you mentioned, you know, the new ELM scheme that's coming to help support farmers. At the moment as well, now feels like for us and others could be the time to change, because we still have the basic payment, although it's reducing each year, and that can help finance that transition. Because when we actually looked at our enterprises, we realized that we were losing a lot of money on sheep. So we decided to reduce the number. So in some people's view, we're now, you know, we're not as big a farmer, we haven't got as big a yield, but if we reduced our sheep by 50%, our costs came down by 75. So our margin is better, and of course we're still getting that single farm payment. So instead of that single farm payment now paying off the loss that the sheep were making, that's now income that gives us the space to look at what a new future looks like.
David Knight.
Hi Claire, thanks very much for your talk, very inspiring. I think I heard on the video a mention of mob grazing. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what it is.
So yeah, it's a way of mimicking how ruminants, so buffalo and bison in the old days, would have roamed the earth. So what they do is they roam in big groups and they go from place to place. They're constantly on the move because of the threat of predators. And so there's a lot of animals in a small area for a short period of time. So there's a lot of dung and urine and trampling and trampling of grass, which is effectively carbon. So by trampling that in and adding that manure and urine, that's a way of feeding the soil microbes and feeding them with carbon and helping them draw down what they need. And then they'll wander on to the next space and they won't be back there maybe for a year or 2 or 6 months or whatever. But we've lost that with modern agriculture. So what we do now is we use an electric fence to act as a predator. So we keep them in. You saw the grid. You could see the grid on the field, and that's the plots we've been on. So we use electric fence to break the field into smaller sections. So they're in each of those, we call them cells, grid sections, for 2 days. And then they're moved on to the next, and they won't go back to, nothing will graze those again for 6 months. And so it gets that rest. And by letting the grass grow much longer, because what's above the ground is reflected below the ground. So the longer the grass, the longer the root structure. And that's what we need, is deep. That's where agriculture's opportunity to draw down carbon is. If you've got a grass farm, you've got carbon in your top layer because that's where your roots are. We need to be taking it down, and the only way we can do that is get roots going down. So effectively it's high animal impact, a large number of animals in a short area, a small space for a short period of time, and then a long rest period.
Great. Richard Buckner.
Sorry, there wasn't actually a question. I just put some extra detail on there about Joel Salatin's work in Polyface Farm in Vermont, and I'm just typing up a bit about Richard Perkins in Sweden, who's got a really interesting book out called Making Small Farms Work, and in there's he details things like insect counts, the financials. He goes into a lot of depth about financials on that place, and he swung that farm around from a traditional, I say traditional, it's not really traditional, is it? But sort of a modern type of agricultural farm to a permaculture-based farm where they are using regenerative agriculture. Anyway, sorry, no questions, but I'm just about to send the other bit.
That's really useful. It's basically what we're doing. And with Richard's stuff, Richard's kind of permaculture on a small area, and that's often been historically true of farmers practicing regenerative agriculture. They are often small areas of land, and what we were really excited to do is to see, can it work if it's bigger and it's not just a family farm where you've got Richard and all of his interns really keen on doing it, and can we do it at scale? And that's what we've proved here. It works at small, and it because often people say, oh, you couldn't do that here. That's the most common thing. It's what I used to say, and it's the most common thing I hear. But it's exactly what they are doing. That's what we're doing. All of those same principles and practices. In fact, our shed, our chicken shed is Richard Perkins' design from the book.
How many acres did you say you're farming?
Between 12 and 1500, depending on the time of year. So sometimes it's 1200 a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think
we've only got 7.
Yeah. But it works everywhere, so that's great. We can all do the same thing.
Yeah.
got time for one last one, Ros.
Thank you, Claire, for a very inspiring talk. I just wondered if the cattle are for beef, have you considered deer, which are said to be healthier red meat with less fat?
That's a good question. A very good question. We haven't yet, but what we do know is that the more diversity you add in, so Richard Perkins and Joel Salatin would just have so many different species and things going on. So, you know, it's like biodiversity, but even within your farming system. So never say never. Yeah, a possibility. There is, of course, the deer in Whiteham Woods. We border on loads of Whiteham Woods. So there are deer in there. So possibly in the future, watch this space, maybe.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, we're dead on 8 o'clock and the talks are supposed to be tiny. So that might be it. But we have one last question. How can we buy your eggs?
We have a vending machine. If anyone knows where, so if you come along the lane into Wytham, past the village hall and along the lane to the farm, about halfway along that lane where the footpath crosses over the road down towards the mill and the Thames, or up the hill towards the woods, there's a vending machine in a container. And though our pasture eggs specifically go through that vending machine, that's the only place you can buy the pasture eggs.
Well, you might be mobbed.
Yeah,
with egg grazers.
I'm afraid we only sell them in trays of 30, and obviously everyone would like 6 eggs at a time, but we can't find a vending machine that is suitable for doing eggs, so it's only trays. So you just have to buy one and split them with your neighbours.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much, and thanks, Claire. That was really wonderful.
No worries. Thanks, everyone. That was really enjoyable.
Thank you so much. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.